Oh, 0 o'clock. 0:01. They didn't knock. They didn't read rights. They just walked in and arrested a sitting judge. 0:01. 0:30. No headlines, no leaks, just boots against marble, and a silence that roared louder than any siren. Inside courtroom 4B of Milwaukee's federal courthouse, time shattered. Judge Hannah Dugan, gavel still warm from the morning's docket, was forced to stand. 2 FBI agents, stone-faced and surgical, snapped steel cuffs around her wrists like they'd done it 100 times before. Only this time the suspect wasn't a criminal. It was the law itself, dressed in black robes. The courtroom gallery froze. One man gasped audibly. A clerk clutched her chest like she'd been shot. No one moved, not even the flies. And just like that, justice had a mugshot. It wasn't the scream of sirens that broke Milwaukee. It was the absence of one. At 8:59 a.m., Judge Hannah Dugan was seated at her bench, calmly reviewing her case notes for the afternoon calendar. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors opened, not with a bang, not with a burst, just a cold, calculated click. The sound of brass hinges moved by federal hands. 4 men entered, black suits, sunglasses, ear wires taut like tension cables. The 5th figure, Marcus Hale, special counsel to the Office of National Security Coordination, followed close behind. He didn't carry a badge. He didn't need one. Dugan raised her eyes. She didn't flinch. "Judge Hannah Dugan," one agent said, "stand and face forward. You are being taken into custody under federal authority." A clerk dropped her pen. A junior bailiff took an unconscious step forward before freezing mid-stride. "For what charge?" Dugan asked, her voice calm but coiled. "Obstruction of federal enforcement, abuse of authority, aiding and abetting a fugitive." Her eyes narrowed. "Those charges are fiction." Hale stepped forward. His voice was smooth, almost amused. "Everything's fiction until it's proven otherwise, Your Honor." 2 agents moved in. Metal kissed skin. The cuffs clamped tight. Dugan's robe shifted as her arms were pulled back, the black fabric no longer a symbol, but a shroud. In the gallery, a clerk whispered under his breath, inside her own courtroom. Not a single camera crew, no press, only the echo of boots against polished stone, and the ghost of the Constitution watching it all happen. They didn't read her rights. They didn't ask her to come quietly. They dragged her, step by step, past the defense tables, past the seal of the United States, past the very law she had sworn to uphold. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared forward, as if daring history not to look away. And as the double doors slammed shut behind her, the silence that remained wasn't peaceful. It was electric. No one inside courtroom 4B spoke for 93 seconds, because deep down, they all knew the same thing. If a judge could be shackled on her own bench, what would stop them from coming for the rest of us next? It had started, like so many catastrophes, with a file that was too thin. Tuesday, 10:17 a.m. The halls of Milwaukee's courthouse still smelled like stale coffee and institutional panic. Judge Hannah Dugan sat behind her bench, scanning the docket. Her eyes landed on a name that shouldn't have been there. Luis Calderon, age 27. Status: DACA recipient. Occupation: former U.S. Army medic. Charge: misdemeanor trespassing. That was it. No priors, no history of violence, not even a parking violation. But something about the way the case was flagged, red-marked and expedited, made her pause. She glanced up. 2 men in the back row didn't belong. Too stiff, too still. No notes, no laptops, no emotion, just focus. Ice, but not in uniform. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just waited, coiled, silent, like coiled springs wrapped in government protocol. "Next case," she said, tapping her gavel. Luis Calderon approached the bench cautiously, his hands trembling. He wasn't afraid of Dugan. He was afraid of being seen. And then it happened. Something almost imperceptible. One of the men in the gallery leaned forward. His coat shifted. A holster flashed. Dugan's voice snapped like a whip. "Mr. Calderon, return to your seat." He froze, confused, afraid. Then the gavel slammed once more. "Bailiff, close the doors, and everyone in the gallery. Remain seated." All heads turned. She rose from the bench. "If any officer intends to execute an arrest inside this courtroom," she said, each word razor-sharp, "you will first obtain written authorization from this court and notify the presiding chief judge." A pause, then silence. The ICE agents didn't move, but their plan had. Luis Calderon, seizing his moment, stepped backward, slowly, cautiously, then bolted through the side doors before anyone could act. A voice rang out, "Do not pursue!" The courtroom locked in place. Outside, Calderon vanished into the sprawl of downtown Milwaukee, and with him, the credibility of a months-long ICE sting designed for one purpose: optics. 3 blocks away, a black SUV idled under a parking structure. Inside, ICE Special Liaison Director Terrence Bell stared at the radio in disbelief. "We had him," he said through gritted teeth. "We had him." Beside him, a younger agent clicked through surveillance photos on a tablet. "Judge Dugan disrupted a federal action. We can spin that." Bell didn't respond. In the back seat, Marcus Hale sat in silence, scrolling through his secure feed. The headlines hadn't hit yet. They would, but not the ones they wanted. This was supposed to be a made-for-TV sting, a brown-skinned criminal paraded out in cuffs, a hero narrative for federal enforcement, a win for Trump's re-election war chest, and for Hale, a ticket to a permanent place in the administration. Now, they'd lost the man, and worse, they'd been defied. "You want to tell D.C. we let a DACA medic walk out the front door because a state judge didn't like the optics?" Bell snapped. Hale didn't look up. "No, I want you to tell them it's handled." He leaned forward, his voice a whisper wrapped in venom. "We don't lose control, not in election season." The tablet pinged. Social media had already caught wind. A law student had live-tweeted part of the event. The phrase, "Judge blocks ICE in courtroom," was climbing. #Dugan already trending. Hale's expression didn't change. He reached for his phone, dialed a secure line, and said 3 words, "Make her pay. Location, 8th floor, J. Edgar Hoover Building, Washington, D.C. Time, 7:12 a.m., the morning after Calderon's escape." The briefing room wasn't a conference room. It was a battlefield without blood. The walls hummed with tension. Dozens of phones buzzed. Screens blinked. Folders flapped open and shut like panicked birds. Marcus Hale stood at the head of the long mahogany table, sleeves rolled, jaw clenched, and eyes like flint. The projector behind him played a loop. Luis Calderon sprinting out of courtroom 4. B, muted, but devastating. Kash Patel, seated just off-center, leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "He slipped through your hands," Hale said flatly. "No," Patel muttered. "He slipped through hers." The room tensed. Around them, representatives from Homeland Security, ICE, DOJ, and Public Affairs sat silently, pretending their fingernails weren't digging into their palms. Hale turned slowly, his voice low, deliberate. "We were supposed to hand-feed the White House a win," he said. "Instead, we gave them a rebellion in a robe." A junior analyst piped up nervous. "Sir, technically, Judge Dugan acted within her state-level jurisdiction. The Constitution—" Hale didn't even look at him. He pointed to the video loop again. "Does that look constitutional to you?" he asked. "That looks like weakness. That looks like headlines we can't afford." He paused, scanning the room. "We fix it now. Clean. Public. Loud." Patel raised an eyebrow. "You want a judge in cuffs?" "I want a symbol," Hale replied. "One that shows no one is untouchable, especially not someone who dares to embarrass federal authority in an election year." "But she didn't commit a federal crime," someone muttered near the door. Hale grinned, wolf-like. "She did now." He tossed a folder onto the table. "Charges obstruction of justice interference with federal investigation. Aiding and abetting a fugitive judicial misconduct standard boilerplate. But with the right camera angles, it would look like treason." "This isn't about justice anymore," Hale said, walking toward the door. "It's about control." Location: Milwaukee Federal Courthouse, 8:01 a.m. the next morning. The plan was surgical. Judge Dugan would be arrested mid-session. No advance warning, no negotiation. She would be pulled from her own bench, not at home, not in transit, but in her courtroom, in front of the symbol she had dared to defy. Because optics weren't an accident. They were engineered. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale with tension. The gallery was fuller than usual. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. Most didn't know what. But the building felt off. The bailiff's smile was gone. Clerks whispered less and typed more. The air conditioning buzzed like a warning. Dugan entered precisely at 8:30 a.m. She wore the same robe she had worn for 15 years. She nodded at the gallery, sat, no fear, no performance. 8:35 a.m. The double doors opened, quietly, deliberately. 2 agents stepped in, flanking the aisle. Behind them, Marcus Hale followed. Not as a lawyer, not as a witness, but as the architect of retribution. The courtroom went still. "Judge Hannah Dugan," the lead agent said, "you are under arrest." Gasps. A hand over a mouth. A pen hit the floor. "For what grounds?" she asked calmly, as if asking for clarification on a filing date. "Obstruction of justice, interfering with federal operations, judicial misconduct." She stood slowly, robe billowing like a curtain pulled back on a stage. "Those aren't crimes, those are talking points." Hale's voice slid through the air like oil. "They're whatever we say they are, Judge." The cuffs snapped shut again. The gallery stood in stunned silence, not in protest, but in paralysis, and as she was escorted out, her chin high, her robe rippling behind her, no one moved, no one cheered, no one cried. They just watched, because deep down, they knew. This wasn't justice. It was a message. Location: social media war room, FBI headquarters, Washington, D.C. Time: 8:49 a.m. 18 minutes after Judge Dugan's arrest, the war room buzzed with anticipation. Phones lit up. Tweets cascaded across the overhead wall screen like fireworks in reverse, bright bursts that quickly darkened into chaos. Marcus Hale stood with arms folded, watching his masterpiece unfold. The image had already gone viral. Judge Hannah Dugan, mid-stride, wrists shackled, black robe fluttering like a defeated flag. The caption, "No one is above the law." Within minutes, #Law and Order Now was trending. MAGA influencers reposted the photo with captions like, "Finally, a judge held accountable. This is what justice looks like. Trump 2024, no apologies." Hale smiled. His phone buzzed again. Text from Trump's campaign manager, "Nice shot, send it to Hannity." He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The machine was already roaring, but cracks were forming, hairline fractures. 8:56 a.m. A rival hashtag appeared, #Stand with Judge Dugan. At first, it was just a flicker. Then came the kindling. A law student's TikTok video, voice trembling as she filmed the arrest from the hallway. A former federal judge reposting the image with the words, "A dark day for the Constitution." 9:04 a.m. CNN interrupts its regular broadcast. MSNBC follows. Even Fox hesitates. 9:07 a.m. A 15-second slow-motion reel of Dugan's handcuffing spreads across Instagram with a soft piano score, and the caption, "When the law is handcuffed, who will protect you?" The shift was seismic. In the war room, a junior analyst's voice cracked. "Sir, negative sentiment just spiked. It was 22%. It's now 61%, and climbing." Hale's smile faltered, just slightly. He turned to Patel, who had entered late and stood in the corner watching the avalanche. "You said this would be clean," Hale snapped. "I said it would be public," Patel replied. "Clean is your problem." Outside the building, protesters had already begun gathering. Some waved pocket constitutions, others just held signs that said one word: enough. Location: Federal Tribunal, Room 7, Milwaukee. Time: 11:13 a.m. The courtroom smelled of varnish, sweat, and reckoning. Every seat was filled. No cameras allowed, but everyone knew. This wasn't a trial. It was a test of law, of power, of who still stood for something in a system collapsing from within. Judge Hannah Dugan sat at the defense table, uncuffed, unsmiling, her robe removed, but her resolve fully dressed. Across the aisle stood U.S. Prosecutor Mitchell Vance, handpicked by Marcus Hale, wearing a navy tie and a permanent sneer. He rose, cleared his throat, and began. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. This defendant allowed a criminal alien to flee federal custody. She obstructed justice. She undermined national security from the bench." He let the words hang in the air like smoke. "This case isn't about politics. It's about accountability." Dugan's attorney, a wiry man named Saul Kaplan, nodded slightly. She stood. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Your Honor, under the 14th Amendment, every person on U.S. soil has a right to due process, citizen or not. My courtroom is not a hunting ground. It's a sanctuary for the law." The prosecutor barked. "You gave sanctuary to a fugitive." Dugan didn't flinch. "I gave the law its spine," Vance scoffed, turning to the gallery. "She chose an illegal immigrant over the federal government." Dugan's voice cut through the air. "I chose the Constitution over a publicity stunt." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The presiding judge raised a hand. Silence returned. Then slowly the presiding judge, Judge Warren Ellison, known for silence and stone-faced rulings, leaned forward. His voice was gravel and gravitas. "Counsel, answer this. When your agents entered that courtroom, without a warrant, without notice, whose law were they enforcing?" Vance blinked. "Federal authority, Your Honor. Homeland Security under Title 8. Ellison raised an eyebrow. "And where in Title 8 does it say you may disregard due process?" No answer. Hannah stepped forward, eyes locked on the bench. "I acted not to shield a man from the law, but to shield the law from men who think they are above it." No one in the room breathed. Because in that moment, it was no longer about Luis Calderon, or ICE, or headlines. It was about whether the law still mattered, or if it was just another tool for those who shouted loudest. Location: Federal Tribunal, Room 7, Milwaukee. Time: 12:27 p.m. The silence before the verdict felt heavier than the charge. Judge Warren Ellison adjusted his glasses, not because he needed to, but because everything he did now mattered. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder, former clerks, law students, retired veterans, a mother holding her daughter's hand, whispering what due process means. Dugan stood, so did her attorney, so did history. Ellison's voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. On the matter of the United States versus Judge Hannah Dugan, a beat. This court finds the defendant acted within her constitutional authority and in defense of judicial independence and due process, another beat. This court orders Judge Hannah Dugan released immediately. No bond, no restriction. The courtroom didn't erupt. It exhaled, a wave of breath, tears, relief, disbelief, and buried dignity rising at once. A man in the gallery muttered, "She did it." A law student began to cry quietly. Kaplan, her attorney, leaned over and whispered, "You didn't just win, you reminded them why we fight." Dugan's eyes didn't glisten. She didn't smile, she simply nodded once. A soldier returning from a war she didn't choose. As she turned to leave, the crowd parted for her. A soft gasp came as someone noticed. Her wrists were bare, but the red marks remained, ghostly bands of where the cuffs had cut. A bruise, not of skin, but of symbolism. Outside, cameras flashed, and as she descended the steps of the courthouse, the crowd parted, not to cheer, but to watch. Because sometimes victory doesn't roar. Sometimes it just stands up and walks away, still breathing. Location, outside the Milwaukee courthouse. Time, 12:45 p.m. The protest had grown into something far bigger than protest. The street was a sea of signs and silence. No chanting, no chaos. Just citizens, hundreds of them, holding up pocket constitutions. Some held cardboard signs scrawled with permanent marker. "We stand with Judge Dugan. The law is not a prop. Power fears principle." As Hannah Dugan stepped into the sunlight, something strange happened. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't clap. They stood still like a courtroom made of people watching, bearing witness. A young law student leaned toward her friend and whispered, "That's what it looks like when someone refuses to kneel." Dugan didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply stood for one long moment, eyes scanning a nation that had watched her shackled and now saw her free. And then, with the same deliberate calm that had defined her from the beginning, she stepped forward and walked straight through the center of the storm. Behind her, the courthouse remained, a place forever changed. Ahead of her, a country uncertain of what came next, but for now, there was clarity. They tried to make her the example, but she became the reminder. Location, West Wing, White House, Washington, D.C. Time, 4:36 p.m., same day. The Situation Room felt smaller than usual, hotter, meaner, like the walls were closing in on the men who had once thought themselves untouchable. Donald Trump stood at the head of the conference table, red-faced and pacing. Coffee cups rattled. Aides stared at their shoes. No one dared meet his eyes. "I asked for a win," he hissed. "You gave me a goddamn martyr in a black robe." Marcus Hale stood stiffly near the windows, arms behind his back. Beside him, Kash Patel shifted uncomfortably, now more scapegoat than strategist. "Sir," Hale began, "if we shift the messaging—" "Message?" Trump cut him off, pointing a stubby finger. "That woman has a trending hashtag. You lost the room, the court, and the damn country." An awkward silence. Jared Kushner pretended to scroll through his phone. Stephen Miller tugged at his cuff. Trump stared at Hale like a man weighing a life sentence. "You told me no judge could defy us. You told me no one would care." Then low and cold, "You were wrong." He turned to Mark Meadows, who gave the faintest nod. By sunset, Marcus Hale's access badges were deactivated, his name quietly removed from the West Wing staffing chart. No public announcement, no press release, just a soft administrative erasure. Later that evening, Hale wandered the White House halls like a man looking for a lifeboat. Staffers avoided his gaze. One aide ducked into a broom closet just to escape his line of sight. As he passed a cleaning crew mopping the floors near the Roosevelt Room, He glanced down at the water swirling gray over polished marble, and he thought, bitterly, "This place cleans the blood better than it cleans the truth." He didn't say goodbye. No one expected him to. Location: Office of Judge Hannah Dugan, Milwaukee. Time: 7:03 p.m. That evening the sun had dropped low in the sky, casting golden streaks through her office window. Judge Dugan sat at her desk, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee. The courthouse was quiet now, protesters gone, cameras packed up. But the tension hadn't left. It had simply burrowed deeper, waiting. There was a soft knock. A young clerk, maybe 23, stepped in, cheeks flushed, holding a small envelope. No insignia, no return address, just her name, written in bold, clean block letters. The clerk offered it with both hands, said nothing, then quietly backed out. Dugan turned it over once, twice, then opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper, no signature, only a sentence, handwritten in steady black ink. Justice needs no weapons. It only needs those who remember how to stand. She didn't cry. She smiled, not triumphantly, but quietly, like someone who knew the storm hadn't passed, but had learned to walk through it. Outside, the Milwaukee skyline flickered as street lamps hummed to life, and far beyond the city, in boardrooms, newsrooms, and whispered corners of power, the story of what happened here wasn't fading. It was spreading, because power doesn't collapse in a roar. It crumbles in 1,000 small cracks. And today, one of those cracks had found daylight. The law doesn't need loyalty. It needs memory. # stand with Judge Dugan, # remember November.